Hernan Kleinman, who will talk about DNS, protector to scale, on scale. So welcome, Hernan.
¿Y el micrófono acá? Ok. Sí, mejor así me acerco al... Gracias.
Thank you. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you very much to LACNIC. The event is going very well. Well, the idea is to speak about DNS, something that for ISPs is obvious, but without DNS, we don't have ISPs, and without DNS, we don't have internet. Everyone says it's something that we have already that works. We don't know why. But as in the picture, DNS is part of the plumbing of ISP. It's the veins of ISP. So the idea is to speak about DNS, how it can help ISP and how it can provide security, not just provide this availability, so that the ISP offers a good service to the user. Why? Here there's an extract of NSA from the United States. This is from last year, and they are talking about why we need to improve the security of DNS. Yeah, because identity issues and you can see the complete document and spoofing. For those of you who are interested in security and good practices, there's a document by NIST that's called Good Practices. I don't know if you know Cricket Liu. He speaks why he talks about why he uses protective DNS, that it's DNS but with security. The goal of protective DNS is to block the access to malware, ransomware, phishing, and malicious websites, and to block spyware attacks and viruses. All that in the RSP. In a simple way, knowing that ISPs in Latin America are always trying to implement it in a simple way that's transparent and that does not affect users. But now let's see the DNS. We've talked about ISPs, and there's a problem in Latin America that's quite common, and it has to do with ISPs that have a bad reputation in RSPs, and that's why there are blacklistings. But the customers have complaints because they they send emails and they get them back. Here you can see a summary of ISP that has no bug. Many ISPs don't know what reverse is, so also poor reputation and blacklisting. And in some countries in the region, like Colombia and Brazil and Ecuador and Argentina, the governments also demand that some domains and contents are blocked, and they ask the ISP to do so, and they penalize the ISP if they don't. All that can be solved by implementing a good DNS, and we have many tools to do so. This is a list of threats that go through DNS, and even though there are tools, all these malware, phishing, trojans, ransomware, etc., mainly and especially botnets, come from the ISP network because the clients are infected. They think, okay, I'll set a firewall and I'll protect myself to have a good service, but all the users have infected Windows. That virus is generating vulnerabilities from within the RSP, and it's also used to receive reflective attacks that come from outside the RSP. So what happens? Many ISPs have the malapraxis that using public DNS, because the idea is that okay, someone else will solve it, and it just needs to work. Malpractices. By using those public, then they allow everything to go out of their network, and everything is infected. And households nowadays, they use IoT, they use Alexa, etc., and they cannot have antivirus. But we've been talking about artificial intelligence. Without DNS, there's no AI. It doesn't work. So it's very important that DNS is not in the hands of thirds. It needs to be on the hands of ISPs so that it works correctly. Another practice is HCP. When you have viruses and you rotate the ISPs, they give new IPs to the virus, to the spam, to the malware, so that it can change and it can attack more freely, and so that more ISPs are in blacklist. And again, we have tickets and complaints and what you already know. This is another issue that's been growing: smishing, SMS with false domains that you all get. That can also be improved. The protection can be improved by DNS. You have probably received messages like this one. Here we are showing, not sure if you know it, there's a free public platform that's called Total Free, that they analyze patterns so that security brands analyze them and say what they think about those. They analyze URLs. This is the example of Netflix, and 15 out of 97 see it as a bad. This kind of things ISP can prevent, and also they can offer it as something valuable to the client, because all fine, it's all fine with AI, but we need to talk about security and education, and we need to start working with that. Another big issue are the false malvertising. These are sites that generate malware, and they are behind good ISPs, and they take traffic to other networks and they inject malware to the user. And that way they create viruses within the ISP network. So the idea is to prevent this kind of events from happening. There's another behavior that we see, is this kind of sites that offer money to their clients by offering the control of their networks to third parties. You pay you they pay them $30 uh, to someone that will download an app, and in another place of part of the world they'll be entering their computer and using it for data mining, etc.
ese tipo de cosas.
So those are things that you need to filter and to work at it. More specifically with the DNS, most ISPs use three types of installation with unbound or bind. I think that most of you know that unbound and power DNS. As we are speaking of security and protective DNS, we compared the different types of DNS and we aim at strongly at the final part of the end that speaks of RPZ, that is Response Policy Zones. It's the possibility of adding rules of analysis to the DNS. That is the goal. So if you're using Unbound, it's good to do an upgrade. If you are using Bind, you can add the RPZ. If you're using Power DNS, in some cases, you can use RPZ too, but it's restricted. So the idea is for you to start looking for DNSs that can be integrated into RPZ. There are many lists in many places, but there are also some that are paid. As a matter of fact, there it says Kitra. This is one of the latest threads that was published last year. And as with the problem of the DNS sec, it would break the DNS. So it's important that when you do an out-of-the-box, you need to know this rule of security. One of the big problems of the ISPs is that the users, I don't know whether it's happened to you, but at least I know of several cases, that the users say, I was blocked access to Disney, I can't enter, or I was blocked the entry to this or that. There's a phenomenon that is, here we put together a list of how in the internet the big brands concentrate traffic, and these big brands mostly are hosting providers. What they do is to host good sites. You go there and you put the pizza store at your home, but by your site there's somebody that is hosting malware. You share the IP address with your neighbor. So the security rule in the firewall is to block an IP address because they are attacking them. But when they block that IP address, for instance, in the first case of AWS, if they block 333.130.90, they are actually blocking 28,192,000 IPs of other sites that have nothing to do, and all of them are shared in the same network. So you have to be very careful with manual block of the IP addresses that are sending attacks, and the concentration. And the counterpart is that you have to be very careful with putting together very highly permissive rules such as *.domain and say I let everything in and there's no more security. So the recommendation is put DNS inside your network, or please have dedicated DNSs in a private cloud that belong to you, that you have control of, that you may have the visibility of what's happening. as you have those DNSs and you have control, you gain seeing what's happening, visibility of traffic, you have logs. You can do integration with security lists, and you can control the quality of service that you give the clients as ISP. The idea is to have graphics like this one, where you can see in these curves, for instance, in the second chart, this is an ISP that is in Venezuela. The blue line is good traffic, and the other colors are traffic that gets blocked. Look at the proportion. Look at the amount of good and bad traffic. This is a DNS only. It's a little piece of the ESP, but all this bad traffic has an impact in the firewalls, in the routers, MikroTik, Cisco, Nokia, Huawei, whatever you have, it runs through your network. Or larger DNSs with million queries per second. So the idea is to have security reports analyzing the blocks of the DNS. You can generate these reports. This chart, we see it a lot in Latin America. If you look at this, the first bar said NX domain, that is, these are domain attacks, fake domains generated by the viruses to attack. In the second, in the red bar, is some rule of RPZ that I mentioned earlier that is improving security, and it isn't, and the orange one is good traffic. So we explain here NX domain and serve fail. These are the typical attacks that are DOS attacks that wanted to make it crash, and so as to prevent the browsing. In the logs, you see strange domains with malware, with bots, that inside their network they may activate a ransomware anytime. They might not care about what happens in the customer, but it may hit the ISP's network. Other examples of malware, phishing, maybe you know MISP. You may know MISP. That also gives security hits and generates bad URLs like this one. Look at this name. Asking the tool, the free tool, Virus Total, all the brands that they detect as dangerous. So what you need to think is the consequences that this may generate of the tip of the iceberg, that is the DNS. So it's also very important to have something to manage IPv6 addresses easily. Because, well, you mentioned the IPv6 networks, and it's also very important to set zero trust rules when configuring the DNS, so that only the ISP networks may be safe to use those DNSs and avoid those problems. Now, the objective of RPZ is to filter the traffic at the level of DNS. Do not confuse that with a firewall that arrests all the traffic, the incoming, the inbound traffic. The RPZ stops it earlier. Or you can also break the packets. They are more expensive, but the idea is to prevent this, to go earlier, to break it earlier. Then there are domain practices for those that host domains, fake domains that don't renew domains or that abandon them, and the hackers use them to register new domains with words that sound to be a good domain, but they're actually a bad domain. What I told you earlier, an NX domain. These are DDoS attacks against the DNS. 90% comes from inside the network of the ISP. These are examples of false domains that are generated as part of these attacks. DDoS, brute force attacks, spoofing of fake IP addresses that come within in the ISP. Of course, you have the issue of a DNSSEC that there's a good practice to implement for people that host domains. Basically, what DNSSEC does is to ensure traceability of the domain owner. That's the idea. That is why we are speaking of encrypted DNS, that sort of thing. If you look at the NSA or VOH or VOT recommendation, that is to encode the DNS traffic, that's different from the DNSSEC. One of the practices that we really recommend for ISPs is to take control of port 53. Port 53 is the request to the DNS. If you redirect port 53 to a secure DNS port, you will avoid the DNS hijacking that will change the IP to the address to the owners of your, because the client has a virus and they change the IP of, and the client puts a www.bank.com and they see the website as if it were the bank, but they will steal it. So when you put the traffic, if you get the port 53, those things don't happen, and that is with the consequence of the blacklist and improving security. For the case of the DNS, if you have high traffic, it is very advisable to use NVIDIA plates that operate quite well, and it's also very useful to implement Anycast resolvers when the ISP has several sites, locations. The idea is to distribute the load among all of them and to have a great availability. And finally, well, not finally, but another big recommendation when there's a lot of traffic and ISPs that have a high volume, cell phones or whatever, is to put traffic balances with something that we call DNS. Here you have a traffic balance from the DNS without great infrastructures, a software that can be easily installed. More Anycast schemes, high availability. Here too, we are showing a scheme using a software that is for the different surroundings of the ISP. Many ISPs that we know in Latin America tend to use MikroTik, at least for the middle layer of their network, and something highly recommendable is to implement the so-called BRRP, that is to balance the load in the DNS traffic in these networks. And the idea is, what we try to show with this picture is that it's not the issue is not to go and magically get into a blacklist, but to put an infrastructure of DNS that may give you security. It should be the first line of defense, looking inward by the firewall. That is the aim, to stop the attacks and to take it from the blacklist so that you may and have that may guarantee the DNS resolution in your network so that you can navigate quickly with cache accelerated So the idea again is to add the RPZ, the policy zones, to your DNS, and to accompany that with the best practices to ensure that the network of the ISP may be as clean as possible, and also give the ISP an opportunity to generate added value, because today security is something that all users are concerned about. They don't know why. Maybe they have a cell phone.
Pero cuando están conectados al Wi-Fi del ISP pueden tener
So when they're connected to the ISP, they may have more security. Or even schools, public Wi-Fi, airports, all those places where you connect just because. And it is there that we had the first recommendations of the DOH or the DOT, that is the DNS encoding, to prevent the man in the middle. That is somebody to get between you and the site. So this was the idea, to tell you about the RPZ, and so that you may know that this exists. If you use unbound or bind rather than unbound, because of the list that I showed earlier, you can implement it and you can start providing security and avoid many headaches if you use RPZ. So to reduce those complaints where you say, well, I received a mail from Paramount telling me that they are or the carrier that says, if you don't do this, in the network will take the IPs. Well, all those things can be prevented and solved if you use DNS RPZ practices. So this is the idea of what we wanted to tell you, so you can use the experience of other ISPs in Latin America that have already been implementing it for some time.
Preguntas para Hernán.
Questions for Hernan? 1, 2, 3 microphones. That's what we have in the room. But if not, yes, there. Yes, go to the mic, please.
Uno, dos.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. I have a question. This type of projects of DNS security, what metrics, what indicators can you get to justify a project of this kind? You meant indicators?
de los grafos.
Of the graphs that I've shown before, you can analyze each of the queries that you do to the DNS, how many queries are to real domains, to malware domains, to dangerous or false domains, or how many attack domains are generated. So you may know, out of 2 million queries that you have per day in your ISP, 50% are good queries or bad queries. And then you can translate that by taking out the stress of the network. But you have that indicator of good traffic, that it's not blocked. I don't know if that's answers your question. And do you have a model for ROI calculation? How do you mean how you justify the investment? Well, in many cases, it's not by reports, but by the number of complaints that you get by phone. I have blacklist, my phone was blocked, my network was blocked, I cannot access a certain platform. Of those who implement IR said That's what happens to them. You can analyze traffic also, but 60% or less than 60% of the ISP with which we contribute to implement RPZ are because of blockage, because of blacklisting. And there's also the reverse thing that is very important. You need to configure also that on top of RPZ. If you don't have RPZ and you don't have reverse, so you will probably block accesses. They will probably block accesses. Yeah, they will call you and tell you that they can actually not access from that network. Thank you very much, Hernan. So a round of applause for him. And he'll be around, so if you have any questions for him,